Thank you for working so hard in our Do Now. Now it's time to preview our new text. Today we're going to be reading a passage called Kwan's Secret Talent. Remember that when we preview our text, we need to decide if it is nonfiction or fiction. We can do this by scanning our text and noticing any text features. Take a look at the passage we will be reading today. I have already identified two text features in our passage. We have the title, which is Kwan's Secret Talent. The title is always at the top. And we also have an illustration down at the bottom. Remember, an illustration is a picture that someone drew. Someone drew this. These are two of our text features in our passage. What is another text feature that you see in our passage? Another text feature in this passage are the paragraph numbers. Every paragraph is numbered off to the left side. There's also this brand new text feature down here in the footnotes. There are some numbers, it says 1 and 2, and next to their numbers are some definitions. If you take a closer look, the numbers are in some of these words. This word is how many. And if you come down here, it tells you that that's a Korean word for grandmother. And we have embroider down here, and it tells you to embroider something means to create a design on it using a needle and thread. So it gives you the definitions of the words. Now that we've looked at our text features, we can decide if this passage is fiction or nonfiction. Remember, a fiction text is something written that is not true or a made-up story. It is not real. And a nonfiction text is something written that is based on real facts, people, and events. It is true and this actually happened. I'm going to go back into our passage. I'm going to let you take another look, scan the text, and try to decide if this is a fiction text or a nonfiction text. Remember, when we scan, we are not reading word for word. We are seeing what pops out at us, and we are taking a closer look at all of our text features. What do you think? Is this text fiction or nonfiction? This text is fiction. It is a fiction text. One way we know that it's a fiction text is through the illustration. Someone drew it. Now we are going to start reading our passage. But before we read our passage, it's super important that we take a guess as to what we think the passage will be about. We already scanned the passage, but I'll go back so you can take a closer look at it. What do you think this passage will be about? I can't wait to see if your prediction was right. I think that this passage is about Kwan and a special talent he has. And I think his special talent is going to be he can draw. I think this because the title is called Kwan's Secret Talent, and the illustration has lots of art behind him. Let's go ahead and look at our thinking jobs so we can read our passage and see if our predictions were right. Your two thinking jobs as we read is to look and listen to the words the teacher reads and to notice who or what the text is about. Remember, when we read our passage, we are going to stop and gist along the way. Sometimes I will give you a gist, and other times I will ask you to try your best and write a gist. Let's read. Kwan's Secret Talent. Kwan, isn't that your teacher? Harmony said, pointing at a woman walking out of the grocery store. Kwan waved, and Mrs. Gibbs walked over to him and his grandmother. It's very nice to see you, Mrs. Gibbs said. Then she saw the cloths wrapped around the groceries Kwan and his grandmother were loading into their van. Oh, how beautiful, she exclaimed. Thank you. These are bojagi, or Korean wrapping cloths. Harmony explained. Kwan and I embroider them together. Kwan looked away. Although he enjoyed helping Harmony make the cloths, he didn't want anyone at school to know about it. Before we continue on to the next page, take a look at our text feature here. We see that Harmony means a Korean word for grandmother. So the person who spoke right here at the beginning was the grandmother. And when they said Kwan and I embroider them, it means to create a design, kind of like this one, using a needle and thread. Let's keep reading. In Korea, they are mostly used to wrap gifts or cover food. Kwan and I use them to carry our groceries, Harmony continued. Kwan, you should bring your cloths to school tomorrow. Your classmates would enjoy seeing them. You have a unique skill, Mrs. Gibbs said. Kwan appreciated his teacher's comments, but he was hesitant. The kids might laugh at the idea of a boy who liked to stitch patterns with a needle and thread. He thought about the bujagi. His grandmother's wide smile showed how proud of him she would be for sharing this Korean custom. Okay, I'll bring some to class tomorrow, Kwan replied quietly. Kwan usually spent some time each evening working on a cloth, but that evening he did not. Harmony sensed that something was wrong. Kwan, are you worried about tomorrow? She asked. Let's pause there and let's talk about our gist for this section. Remember, our gist is a short retelling of the text. Our gist for this section is that Kwan and Harmony run into his teacher at the grocery store and she tells him he should show his cloths at school. Kwan stared at the floor. What are the other kids going to think? He said. This isn't the kind of thing they do for fun. Creating embroidered patterns isn't like playing an instrument or a sport. You're right, Harmony said. It is different, but that's why it's so special. Then she brought out a fine cloth with detailed floral designs. When your grandfather and I were married, we received a gift from his mother wrapped in this cloth she made. In Korea, gifts given in wrapping cloths are extra special because they're a symbol of love and good luck. Even though the cloths have many uses today, they also have a rich history, she explained. The next morning, Kwan took several wrapping cloths to school. Let's pause there again and let's talk about what we just read. Our gist for this section is that Kwan is nervous about showing the cloths, but Harmony tells him it's a part of their culture. Let's see what happens when Kwan takes the cloths to school. During art class, his heart began to race faster. He knew Mrs. Gibbs would eventually call on him. Just as he began to hope time would run out, he heard his name. As Kwan walked to the front of the room, his face felt hot. His hands trembled as he took the cloths out of his backpack. Kwan took a deep breath and began to tell the class about the cloths. Then he showed everyone how to use a needle and thread to stitch a tree design onto a cloth. His classmates just stared. When he finished, he saw a classmate's hand shoot into the air. Kwan held his breath as Mrs. Gibbs called on Greg. Wow, Kwan, I can't believe you did that by yourself, Greg said. That looks awesome. Now that we just finished reading this section of the passage, try your best to write a gist statement about this section. My gist statement is that Kwan shows the cloths to his classmates and they were impressed. Hopefully you enjoyed reading that passage, and stopping and gisting along the way helped you understand a little bit more of what we read. Now it is your turn to try your best and write a gist of the whole text. Remember, a gist is a short retelling of the text. Try your best. My gist statement is that Kwan's teacher wants him to bring the cloths he makes with his grandmother to school, and even though he's nervous to show them, he takes them to class. Now that we have recapped what we read, that means we have retold in a short way what we just read, we need to find the main idea. So what was the main idea of what we just read? Remember, there are 3 steps when we find the main idea. The first step is to know our topic. We need to figure out what the text is mostly about. This is when we ask ourselves, are we learning about someone or something, In step 2, we are going to look for clues. What ideas are being talked about? We can find these ideas usually because they're being repeated. They're repeated words, repeated images, or headings. You need to look through the whole text to find these clues. And in step 3, we're going to put it all together. We're going to ask ourselves, what does the author want to teach us about the topic? Now, those were a lot of steps, but let's break it down and do step 1. Are we learning about someone or something? We are learning about someone, but who are we learning about? We're learning about Kwan. So we know we're learning about Kwan. We need to know what exactly we're learning about him. And the way we're going to do this is by going back into the text and see what ideas are being talked about. Take a look at some of the ideas that I underlined. There's some ideas underlined in red and some ideas underlined in green. Take 30 seconds and scan the text. Look at the words I underlined. What kind of ideas are underlined in red? What are these ideas about? The ideas in red are ideas about the cloths. Now take another 30 seconds and scan the text. What are the ideas in green about? The ideas in green are about Kwan not being so sure about taking his cloths to school. It was about his feelings and how he felt about taking his cloths. We know we're learning about Kwan. We also know that some of the repeated ideas are the cloths and his feelings and emotions about taking the cloths to school. So now we need to put all of those things together and try to figure out what the author is trying to teach you about the topic. What is the author trying to teach you about the topic? Is it A, Kwan likes to spend time with Harmony? B, Kwan's teacher cares about him and his crafts? C, Harmony is upset that Kwan doesn't want to show the cloths? Or D, Kwan makes special cloths but is nervous to share his talent with his classmates at school? It is D. The author is trying to teach us that Kwan makes special cloths but is nervous to share his talent with his classmates at school. If you look back into our text, we had said that we were learning about Kwan, and we also saw some important ideas here that they were the cloths and that he was pretty nervous about showing them to school. Now that we've previewed the text, we have said it's a fiction text, and we figured out our main idea. We are ready to answer some questions. But before we answer some questions, let's review the thinking steps we learned this week. There are some thinking steps we use to help us use these text features to locate information effectively. How many steps are in our thinking steps? That's right, there are 4 steps. Step 1 is to read the question about the text. In step 2, we're going to circle keywords that will help you find the answer. In step 3, you're going to go back into the text and scan the text features and the text for these keywords and images. And in step 4, we're going to read near the text feature to answer our question.